Alrighty, so to formally kick it off, guys, thank you kindly for everyone coming out tonight. Thank you, our club, for hosting the space and getting everyone together. And of course, thank you to Mr. James Hinchcliffe for joining us tonight.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Right on. So, just quickly about myself, my name is Vlad Dojsic. I've been a member here since kind of day one, and I work for a company called RacingEdge.com. We do motorsport software solutions for the motorsport market, automotive industry, auction software, web dev, that sort of thing. And our club has been kind enough to have me moderate a few of these really cool chats. One of my latest chat is right there, Mr. Ron Rayshart. But today we have the spotlight on a IndyCar driver in our presence. So, James.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out. This is cool. This is a fun little setup you guys have here. I've heard a lot about the club. Hadn't had the chance to make it out here before, so excited that we managed to make the schedules work. I am race car driver and commentator, James Hinchcliffe. For those of you that don't know, according to the screen, 11 seasons I think in IndyCar. Bit of other stuff mixed in between that, sports car stuff, touring car stuff, things of that nature. And I'm slowly transitioning over to the TV commentary booth now, which is pretty exciting. Not done driving. We're going to do some more driving in the future for sure. But yeah, for now, this year is kind of step one of phase two of the career.
Right. Well, I will have plenty more questions about, the future plans coming up. But if you want to take us all the way back to step one of phase one,
Right.
where did the obsession begin? How did you get into motorsports and, that whole kind of journey?
Yeah, so it's my dad's fault. My dad, he was from England, and so obviously in the UK, motorsports is huge. And so growing up, I didn't have a Canadian dad who loved hockey. I had a British dad who loved racing. So I was like the weird kid in school because I didn't know about or play or care about hockey at all.
Right.
All I cared about was racing. It was Sundays were 7 o'clock, you watch the F1 race, then you do homework and chores, and in the afternoon you watch the IndyCar races. And we obviously have the race here in Toronto, which started the year I was born. So I missed that one, but I've been to every one since, either as a fan or a participant. So that really is what kind of made me truly fall in love with it, was kind of seeing it up close as a kid and made me fall in love with IndyCar racing specifically. And then I got a go-kart for my ninth birthday and all downhill from there.
Yeah. It seems like karting is obviously the way everyone kind of progresses, begins. But yeah, if you really want to expand, like what was the ladder like for you? Obviously, kind of in IndyCar is one of the pinnacles of open wheel racing. There's a long journey to go from the kid at 9 years old in the kart to the kid in the IndyCar.
Yeah.
So how'd that look like for you?
Long,
Right.
painful, expensive. Um, yeah. So, when I started karting, I didn't at 9 years old think that I could be a professional racing driver. I was like, that's stupid. That's not a real job. Like, no one actually gets to do that. It was just a hobby. It was fun. A lot of kids play hockey with no actual aspirations of being in the NHL. Thursday night beer league once they're older is as good as it's going to get, and that's cool.
Yeah.
And I had sort of, that sort of was my mindset when I got into it. And, in karting, the older you get, you move up classes and the karts get a little faster, the competition gets a little harder. And it seemed like every year I moved up, I did better and I enjoyed it more. I sucked when I started. I was not good. No, and I had to work really hard at it, honestly, from a really young age. I wasn't one of these kids that just jumped in and was like just blitzing the field right off the bat. I finished last every single race in my first year of karting.
No way.
Yeah,
Holy crap.
my dad halfway through the season, he was like, if this isn't fun anymore, we can sell the go-kart. And I was like, no, this is fun. I'm gonna do it. I like it. And so that was it. I had to work hard at it.
Mhm.
But I think that actually was good for me in the long run. So yeah, a couple years of karting, and then when I was 14, there was a guy that ran a kart team that sort of did more of the North American, the SCUSA. So it's
Yep.
Shifter Karts USA. It's kind of like that's where the kids that want to race cars go race.
Yep.
And he said, "Yeah, I think you could do this." I said, "All right, well, if you think I could do it, I'll give it a shot." So did SCUSA for a couple years, and we did okay. It was challenging because living in Ontario, racing against kids that are from like California and Florida, they're karting all year long, and I
Right.
would kart 6 months a year, right? So
Right.
you're just not getting the seat time, you're not getting the mileage. So we were top five in karting, but we weren't like winning a ton of national championships or anything. We won in Canada, we weren't winning the U.S. stuff. Um, and then I got an opportunity to go to the Bridgestone Racing Academy, which is now a Skip Barber School, I think, up at Motorsport and DDT. Brett Goodman snuck me in the cars a year before I probably should have been in the cars. And I was racing against guys that were 18, 19, 20. I was 15. And these were drivers that wanted to be professional racing drivers. And I was like, all right, well, let's give this a shot. Let's see how this goes. And I ended up winning my first weekend. And that was kind of the first moment that I thought to myself, oh, okay, maybe there's something to this. And so my dad and I had a chat about it, and we're like, yeah, let's take a crack at it and see how far we can go. And then from there, I got a opportunity to go to so Formula BMW was a series, a junior category that started in 2004, and it was their first year. They opened up an application for all karters in North America and South America, actually, to be selected to go to this shootout over in Spain. They were going to pick 6 drivers and give them a sponsorship to do the series. They were going to pick 24 drivers to go over, and 6 were going to get a scholarship. So we put in our application, being like, we're not going to get this, but let's just put in the application. And then we were selected as one of the 24 drivers to go over. And we were like, that's wild. We're going to go to a Formula One track and test these cool cars and, all this media training, whatever. Like, I'm not going to win it, but man, it'll be a cool experience. We should probably go do this. So Dad and I flew over to Spain.
And roughly what age were you at this
So
point?
I would have been
17?
17. 16? 17. 17. I turned, 17. And so went over to Spain, spent 3 days getting scrutinized by a bunch of angry German guys. They're great. They're great. There's some funny stories from that. But ended up winning one of the scholarships somehow. And so we ended up racing Formula BMW that following year, finished second in the championship. From there, moved to formerly the Star Mazda Championship. Now it's called Indy Pro 2000, I think. And this was still back when open wheel had a split, right? We still had Champ Car, and then the IRL. And we were kind of on the Champ Car side of the battle. And so I got an offer to go drive for Forsyth Racing in the Atlantic Championship, which the kind of one below the top level over there, fully sponsored program. And that's when I convinced my parents it was time to drop out of school and really focus full time on racing, because I was in university at the time. Most drivers never make it to that point, right? They give up on school long before that. But it was important to my parents. So I was in school because this opportunity came up, and it was Forsyth, right? Like Forsyth had this history of bringing Canadian drivers, especially, and like all my heroes, Jock, Greg, Paul, like all those guys drove for Forsyth. This was like the dream come true. And then 2 years into that series, the world fell apart in the global financial crisis. Champ Car folded, they merged, and all of a sudden I realized I had spent all these years on the wrong side of the war. And so I had to kind of give up on Atlantic and do a lateral step over to Indy Lights for a few seasons. And then 2 years in Indy Lights, finished second in the championship in 2010, and got a call from Newman Haas to go test. I said, hey, we've watched, you've had a good year. Brought me in for like this really intense interview at the shop, like super nerve-wracking. They're like, we want to do this test down in Sebring. We've hired Oriol Servia, veteran, 10 years. We want a rookie to be his teammate. So we want to give you a shot. So we go to Sebring, we do a 2-day test, and at the end of the test, I was a tenth of a second quicker than Oriol. So that was pretty cool. That was a pretty neat moment. That was kind of one of those like mic drop moments, right? And you're like walking away from that being like, oh, well, I guess my career's made now. That's it. That's all you had to do. Now it's all easy.
Yeah.
Nay. They offered me a contract, which I obviously signed. The problem was they didn't have a sponsor at the time. And sponsorship was always kind of this chicken and egg situation, especially back then, right? It was the team's point was, well, if we have a sponsor, we can hire the driver. And the sponsor's like, well, who's the driver? Well, we're not going to sponsor you until you have your driver, so we know who we're sponsoring. Well, we can't hire the driver until we have his. So it's this vicious circle, right? So they're like, we don't have a sponsor, but we're going to find it. So they signed me, started going to pitch sponsors, and they said they had a date, by which we had to have money in the bank to make it to the first race in St. Pete. Super long story short, that date came and went, and we had no money. And so I went to St. Pete with my team shirt on and stood on pit wall and watched everyone else drive around. And I was like, well, this is stupid. Like, why? I don't like this sport anymore.
And you're also like, but I'm also fast. You're
Well,
like,
but it was so frustrating, right? Because there are a million stories in the 5 6 years preceding that moment where you're up and down and up and down, and there's so many things working against you. There's so many barriers to overcome, so many hurdles you got to tackle, and we had done everything. I had done everything everything in my power, right? Like my job's to drive the car. I did what I had to do to get that opportunity at the test. I prepared for that test. I executed at the test. We did, my dad, my mom, my family, my whole family and I spent 7 years chasing money, getting turned down by sponsors, whatever we had to do, beg, borrow, steal to get the money to stay in the sport. And even after all that, I couldn't get in an IndyCar. So I was like, well, this is dumb. I guess I got to go back to school because I don't know what else I can do.
right.
And I was like really down on it for about 24 hours. And then the Saturday night of that first race, we got a sponsor call us back saying, we're in. Like, well, we missed this one, but we'll be on track for the next one. So 2 weeks later, I made my IndyCar debut. Oh, and that's the short version of the story. That's like 20, 11 years, 12 years right there in a couple minutes.
That was pretty well done. That was concise. And it's really funny. I just had this in the back of my mind. I wanted to share, but Kobe Bryant in his first basketball game scored 0 points.
Right.
And it's this kind of thing about grit, where the most talented people that survive are the ones that have grit, the ones that were not good at the start, but they put in the hours, they put their head down, and they got to where they needed to be.
It's the work ethic thing, man. I mean, it sounds so cliche, and I'm not trying to sit here saying like I did or do things better, but I've seen so many drivers and athletes in general, but obviously a lot of drivers that were just so naturally talented that coming up, they just didn't have to work hard.
For sure.
And then when you get to IndyCar, like when you're coming up, right, and you're good, you're racing against 2 or 3 other drivers each level. Each level, there's 2 or 3 drivers that are legitimately fighting for the championship, right? And so if you're good, you're one of those 2 or 3 drivers. So every year it's 2 or 3 guys, 2 or 3 guys. You're always fighting for a podium. You're always fighting for a pole. You're always fighting for a win. And then you get to IndyCar, and you have to realize that every one of those 3 drivers for the last 10 years is all in one spot. Right. It's like really, really hard.
Right.
You're not one of those 3 anymore. You're now one of those 26.
Yeah.
And you're the one with the least experience. So it's you have to work. Getting there is so hard and so much work. Staying there is so much harder and so much more work. And the drivers that just had it all, I don't say given to them, but it just came easy for them. I've seen it a dozen times. They really struggle at the top level because they don't know how to work hard. They don't know how to put that extra effort in. They don't know how to approach certain problems. They don't know how to manage certain situations because they've never had to do it. It was all just so easy up to that point.
Right. It's like grit beats talent.
It really does.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating what you just said there about the rankings. You're fighting against 2 or 3 people in every class as you're growing up, but once you get to IndyCar and you're in this top step, it's not 2 or 3 people. It's literally the whole field is like the top of the top, the best of the best, and it's like, how badly do you want it? Are you going to put in the extra hours off track? Are you going to do everything you need to do to stay there, let alone be competitive?
Exactly right.
Yeah, that was very well said. Now I got to ask you, what was that first step, that first test or when you actually got comfortable with an Indy car? Like, what? Like, I don't even know how to ask this question, but I think my reaction expresses it. Like, how? Because that is such a big jump in performance in every dynamic, right? Power, grip, downforce, like everything changes. What was that like?
The interesting thing is, so like nowadays the ladder system is so structured and it's so much nicer. Like it would be awesome it would have been awesome to have had that when I was coming up, because every year my dad and I would sit there and be like, okay, what series should we try to run next year? Like, when the answer was always, well, which one's got the best competition, right? Sure. We always just try to look for the hardest competition. But now it's a very clear path. You do F2000, you do Indy Pro, you do Indy Lights, and then it's like easy. And the champions actually get scholarships to move up, like something that's never been a thing in motorsports before 2012 or whatever when they started doing it. And so when I was coming up, it was a bit more disjointed, but I'd driven a lot of different cars, and every time you move to a new car, it's kind of they've sort of spaced the different classes out pretty well. Every jump is a 20% jump. So you go from BMW to Pro Mazda, or Pro Mazda to Atlantic, or Indy Lights, IndyCar. It's a 20% jump. So you get in the car and it's got 20% more power. The brakes are 20% more powerful. The downforce is 20% more. And so while that last step from Indy Lights to IndyCar is the biggest step, it's still a very relative step.
Okay.
And so you show up fairly, if you've gone through the system, you actually show up pretty well prepared for that jump because you're used to every year or two moving up categories to a more powerful car, to a car with more downforce, things like that. So I think that first test in an Indy car was actually more just like it was the emotion of it, right? It was like the realization of a dream. That was the more kind of awe-striking factor than like the performance of the car necessarily.
Interesting. Yeah. And well said about the kind of progression that they give you, right? I mean, you get there and you're like, all right, I know how to do this. You know?
Yeah, it's weirdly like there's a lot more procedural stuff in an IndyCar. You go from working with one engineer to five engineers. There's,
Right.
there's a lot more off track, I think, that changes.
Yeah.
But on track, it's got an engine, four wheels, you just three pedals at the time. You just got to figure it out.
Yeah. Same sport.
Same sport.
Right on. Well, it seems like you did quite well and were able to acclimate and get some good points on the board. I think I'll kind of jump a bit further now into 2015. There was a big moment in your career in 2015, in your career, in your life, in just everything. And I'm not sure if everyone knows the story, so I'll let you kind of take the reins. And yeah, let us know what happened in 2015.
So yeah, 2015, I had switched teams and it was going pretty well. We won our second race together in one of the most embarrassing races in IndyCar history, but we won't get into that. And then practicing for the Indy 500, driving around the day after qualifying in practice, minding my own business, and a part failed on the car. I hit the wall in turn 3 at about 225 miles an hour, 380K, 370K, something like that. That's bad on a good day. On a bad day, on top of hitting the wall at that speed, 126G impact, part of the suspension actually pierced the tub and went straight through me. So I was shish kebabbed, for lack of a better term. And when it did that, it actually hit the femoral artery in my left leg. And so I was bleeding to death on the racetrack. And it was there were 1,000 things that had to happen just wrong in the perfect order in the perfect way for that accident and that injury to occur, because that never happens. Like the part that failed, I've got mechanics that have been in the sport 25 years. It's like never seen that fail before.
Right.
And then the injury that I had never been seen before. It never happened before. So there were 1,000 things that had to happen just wrong, but then there were 1,000 things that had to happen just right for me to make it out of that situation alive. Um, because that injury had never happened before, there was no protocol for how to deal with it. So the safety team that like we always brag about the safety team in IndyCar. We have for years because we were the first series that had a traveling dedicated group, and a lot of them are firefighters or EMTs, things like that. They did some pretty heads up thinking to deal with my situation. They had to break certain protocols, invent protocols on the fly, and without that, I wouldn't. If it had just been a random group of volunteers unique to each track, there's no way I would have made it. If I had been at any other racetrack, I wouldn't have made it. The proximity of Indianapolis Motor Speedway to the closest level 1 trauma center is by far the closest of any of the tracks that we race at. And they lost my pulse by the time they got me in the OR. So it's a 4 mile, 6-ish K trip from Indy to the hospital on the same street. So they just shut the street down. Ambulance flew down. I was there in 7 minutes or something. I think the next shortest time was 32 minutes that they've timed out from a racetrack to a level 1 trauma center. And they lost my pulse about minute 10 when we got to the hospital. So yeah, 1,000 things had to go right for me to get out of that accident. And I woke up. Last thing I remember, I was driving my car. Everything's cool. And then I blink, and I am staring at a bunch of bright lights, a bunch of very concerned people standing around the table. I have a neck brace on. I have a tube down my throat. I'm bolted to a board. Can't talk. I've got to communicate with a pen and piece of paper. So I remember thinking, like, something's gone wrong. This is not good. This is not good.
Right.
And it took me a really long time to understand what had happened because it had never happened before, right? And I was also like, not all there. Drugs, concussions, whatever. some fun combination of the two.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it took me a minute to understand how I got hurt and what was really hurt. But they told me, I wasn't gonna walk for 2 weeks. I'd be in hospital for about a month, and I wouldn't drive again for 6, 7 months. And I walked on day 4. I got out of the hospital in 10 days, and I drove a car 4 months later. So I was highly motivated to get back to work.
Right.
But yeah, it was crazy, crazy experience all in all, career wise, personally, life wise. It was crazy. Very, very lucky. Very lucky.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you said like 1,000 things had to go wrong for the incident to happen, and 1,000 things had to go right. And I
Mm.
mean, it's remarkable that kind of played out as it did for you.
Yeah.
And then I think I saw an interview of, I think it was Marco Andretti. He said there was the first question he asked you. I can't recall what it was, but the second or the first question you asked him was like, I guess what happened? How did this go?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Marco was the only guy they let into the room. And because the part that failed is a spec part on the car, and like I said, they'd never seen it fail before, so it actually shut down practice for the rest of the day until they could do a bit of an investigation and make sure it
Right,
wasn't
right.
a batch issue or something that could happen to other cars. So practice was done, and Marco came over, and he was there. So yeah, I had to write on a piece of paper, and I said, what happened was my first question, and he sort of explained it. Then I said, "Where's my family?" Because I knew mom was gonna be freaking out, of course.
Of
And
course, like there was a slight eye roll.
of course, and poor thing was on vacation too. She got a phone call being like, "Hey, so there's been a thing. Um, there's a plane sitting on the tarmac waiting for you. You should probably get on it and get to Indianapolis."
Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, my poor parents. That wouldn't have been a fun flight. So that was question number 2, and then question number 3 was, when can I get back in the car? And Marco understood that. The doctors in the room, they didn't understand that so much. They were very upset with me for asking that question. They're like, "We just spent the last 6 hours trying to save you from what that car did, and you want to get back in it?" And I'm like, "Why?
Yeah, yeah.
And Marco still has the piece of paper. He
Oh, no
kept
way.
it.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
amazing.
It's really funny. My penmanship was terrible, though, I gotta say,
Sure.
in that situation was not great. But yeah, so he still got that sheet of paper.
Wild, like absolutely wild. But it's just that level of competitiveness, that level of athleticism, right? That mental dedication and focus to your craft is just is striking that you were able to care so much. And if you want to tell the team here, like, what did you do the following year at Indy? When
So
like
yeah, so
a
we
year later?
we went back a year later, and so I missed the rest of the season, and we go back to India a year later, and it's everybody was just talking about that, right? They were just talking about the crash and coming back, and is he going to be able to do it, and whatever, whatever. And it was so funny because I was so far removed from it, like mentally, that was so long ago to me. I'd already been back in a car. I'd already been back on an oval. We'd already been back racing. I'd already had another crash on an oval. I had a testing crash at Phoenix. So there was nothing left. There was no boxes left to check for me, right? It was just, we're just going to the track. It was like any other May, but it's all anybody could talk about. And I remember saying to my crew the first day of practice, I was like, look, guys, I'll be honest with you. I'm really sick of this story. I'm really sick of telling it. So let's give everybody a different story to tell. That's what we're going to do this month. And we went out and led laps in the GP, ended up finishing third in the GP, which was a good start. And then opens up for oval practice and goes decent enough. And then, yeah, qualifying weekend, we managed to put the car on pole, which was kind of a nice stamp on that. Being like, no, we're good. Everything's fine.
Yeah,
You guys
yeah.
can start talking about something else now.
Again, remarkable. I
Yeah.
mean, you really came into that with like a lot of courage. Like frankly, like I mean, after everything you went
Or
through,
stupidity, depending on how you
a
look at
little
it.
bit
Yeah.
of both. Youthful
Yeah.
arrogance.
Yeah.
But again, your talent allowed you to kind of stay focused, do what you do best, and put the car on pole, which is just such an amazing story and just truly remarkable. Yeah, very impressive.
I appreciate it.
And just quickly, any questions while we're here? We're still a team open conversation. We're good. Fun. All right.
The first time back in the car was very cool. So my favorite track in the States is Road America. And I'd raced there in the junior categories, but IndyCar wasn't racing there when I first joined the series. And they had announced that we were going to go back there in 2016. So my first test was actually the first IndyCar test at Road America, with the new generation car or whatever. So I was going back to one of my favorite places, getting back in the car, and it's all I thought about for the last 4 months, right? And I had no fear about getting back in the car. Like I didn't care about that. I had a little bit of anxiety because racing is such a mental sport, right? And the difference between being like 1 second off the pace and the pace, that that difference is massive. Every tenth, once you're within a second of the fastest the car can go, every tenth is exponentially harder. It's exponentially more physically challenging. It's exponentially more mentally challenging. And my only concern getting back in the car was my like subconscious brain going to allow me to still push for that last second. And that was my only, because that's something you can't know until you do it, right? And I was pretty sure I was going to be okay, but it's just human nature to have that sort of potential doubt in your mind. And so day comes, whatever, and we're running around first couple laps, and turn one at Road America and IndyCar's pretty quick corner. With the downforce of those cars, it doesn't look it. Like when you stand there, like, all right, this is a fourth gear corner at 130 miles an hour. I was like, the hell it is. They're like, no, that's what the data says. I was like, all right, let's try it. So I was running out there. It was like my fifth or sixth lap. I go through turn one, bunch of speed. Car snaps out, like full opposite lock. Didn't lift, kept going. Heart rate didn't move, and I was like, I'm good. That's it. That's all I needed. But it was really cool to get back. Yeah.
Wild. Yeah. Great question as well.
Yeah.
And now I guess we can kind of jump into you've done a little bit in IMSA, right? You've done a little bit of V8 Supercar and a little bit of IMSA. Now that you're kind of transitioning to phase two and doing the commentator thing, which you've kind of been peppering in, I think, right, over the past
Yep.
few seasons and this and that, helping with NBC. Is there any desire for you to ever try to touch any of the holy trinity of endurance racing events?
100%. I mean, I've done Daytona a bunch of times.
Mazda or
Yeah,
something, right?
I ran with Mazda for 5 or 6 years. So full disclosure, I was actually really close to a full-time IMSA program for this season. And, I thought IndyCar was political. Wow. So something happened at the last minute, 11th hour. We had a deal agreed, everything was all ready to go, and it all sort of fell apart at the last minute, which was a shame because there was then no time to sort anything else out. So this year is definitely going to be a little bit sporadic on the driving front. I'm going to take this opportunity to try to maybe do some things I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do otherwise. Some kind of fun one-off stuff here and there, whatever I can get my hands on. May's not great for me. Working in NBC, they keep May pretty busy, but next time, rain check. There you go. I like that. We got time off in August.
Yeah.
So between doing commentary for both IndyCar and IMSA, I'll try to do a couple of one-off races here and there, but then absolutely the goal for 23 is to be back full-time on the IMSA grid. Get back to Daytona. Would love to take a crack at Le Mans.
What rung are we looking at?
Realistically, I think the team has LMDH aspirations, but I think that's probably a 24 at best program. So I think it'd be a GTD Pro for 23. Fingers crossed.
Yep.
Politics pending. And yeah, like I said, I mean, I'd love to try Le Mans. I'd love to try, I'll do anything else. I still got a couple of driving years left in me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that Adam asked the question about or kind of prompted you to come to one of our track days.
Yeah.
But
Anytime, man.
We got a lot of drivers here.
Yeah.
What would be a driving tip you could give the team here? What is like one thing that you can say is the easiest tip you can give someone that will give them that extra, 3-4 tenths maybe?
Slow in, fast out.
Pretty simple.
There's not a car here. There's maybe one car here that's designed to brake well. And the biggest mistake people make on track days is they try to be the last of the late breakers, and you're slow. You brake late, you're slow in the middle, you're slow off, and your lap time suffers. Slow in, fast out.
Yeah, it's so funny. I remember hearing that when I was younger, getting into track on two wheels. That's kind of my space. And somebody was like, well they're saying smooth is fast. And to be smooth, you kind of want to take it slow.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
And so I looked at the guys and I was like, so is slow fast? And they're like, no, it's not. And I was like, but it kind of is.
Algebraically, yes, you could make that work. Yes.
And it's kind of funny because when you do your fastest lap or when you watch a fast lap, it doesn't look fast.
It looks very
because
calm.
Everything's balanced.
Unless it's Montoya.
Right, sure.
Montoya's onboards never looked calm, but they were always fast. That guy was super weird.
Drove out of control.
Yeah, just on this edge of in control. Yeah.
Well, that's.
But yes, normally you're right. You watch an onboard lap, and we do that all the time, right? Drivers love comparing onboards because you can show it to your engineer and be like, well, mine doesn't do that.
Right.
You know, look at my hands, look at his hands, make it do that. I'll be on pole if you can make it do that.
Yeah.
But it's true. Pole laps always look pretty unspectacular.
Yeah, because everything is so smooth and balanced the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy you kind of brought up data there because this is something that was kind of on my mind prior to our chat is like, you know, you guys are a race car driver in an Indy car and you're like, all right, I'm going super fast. I know what I'm doing, but I'm going super fast and I'm really at these limits. And then an engineer's like, nah, dude.
Yeah.
Like, how does that feel at like that limit? You know, it's one thing for someone to tell, you know, us in like a kind of grassroots league, oh, dude, brake later. It's like, oh, sure, it's not that dangerous. But for you guys, like finding those moments and like finding the confidence, right? In not just yourself in the car, but the whole, how does that feel?
I was always a very data driven driver. Like I loved poring over data. I learned a lot from data. And what you end up having to do is you sort of have to very early on be able to like calibrate your brain to know what that squiggly line translates to on track, right? So if it says you got to brake 30 feet later, like you stand here and you look at 30 feet, you're like, that's a long way. I don't want to do that. That sounds scary.
Yeah.
And then you're like in the car, you're like, all right, I'm going to brake 30 feet later. Well, 30 feet at, 180 miles an hour is almost an immeasurable amount of time.
Sure, yeah.
So like the first thing you do when early on, the first thing you do, like, yeah, brake 30 feet later is you blow the corner by like a mile, right? Because you're like, I thought I just broke a little bit later. Like, no, you broke 130 feet later. And so a lot of it is just calibrating your brain and your muscle memory to understand what those amounts really are, and hey, this guy's carrying 4 more mile an hour apex speed in turn 1. You're like, okay, how much faster is 4 miles an hour when you're in a 50 mile an hour corner versus a 90 mile an hour corner versus a 130 mile an hour corner? Because sometimes you think, you're in a 130 mile an hour corner and you're like, all right, I'm just absolutely sending this thing. This is going to be incredible.
Yeah.
But like in the relative, like you went like 1 mile an hour faster and it feels so fast because it's so hard to get that last little bit. And again, that feels a lot different if it's a 50 mile an hour corner and 80 mile an hour corner.
The relativity of it, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all just training your brain to understand those limits. And like I said, being able to apply what you see on data to what's actually happening in the car.
Yeah. And do you spend a lot of time in the sim? I know we spoke earlier about Dan, and Dan does a lot of sim racing things these days. But how is that like because sim racing really has just kind of taken its evolution, and we're seeing some really cool stuff happening there. But if you want to talk to us about your kind of progression in motorsport, and how much did the sim play a factor then for you? Was it even a thing for drivers then, as much as it is today?
Not nowhere near as much as it is today. Like home sim setups. I mean, I honestly could maybe list 2 professional drivers that have them and used them actually for any kind of training. iRacing obviously has blown up a lot in the last couple of years, and I went from someone that really had no time for it to a big believer in it, a big fan of it. A bit too late.
Sure.
But no, I think so. Like, I mean, for me, no home sim stuff ever happened. The IndyCar manufacturers have their own big, $1 million sims, which suck, by the way.
Really?
No, they're terrible. I'd rather be on iRacing, to be honest.
Wild. One of my like business partners from Racing Edge, he sells those elaborate multi-million-dollar sims. He sold a few of them, and I'm gonna tell him that they suck. I'm gonna be like, dude, James Hinchcliffe told me they suck, man.
They're not great.
They're
not great. Let's put it this way: value for dollar, not a great deal.
Sure.
Not a great deal. Value for dollar, what you got in there, awesome.
Cool.
Really good.
And we're actually hosting tryouts for our sim team. So
there you go.
I mean,
there you go. But no, the sims now honestly are they're really good mental training tools more than anything.
Right.
You're not gonna get in an IndyCar iRacing at Barber and find anything that's gonna help you at the track in the real car. The driving dynamics are very good, and they're good enough that the basics of how you drive a car translate to lap time, et cetera, et cetera. But that last 1 second that we were talking about. Like that's what you need to train. That's what you need to practice, and you can't learn that on a sim. But the mental side of sim racing is very helpful. Qualifying, you get 2 laps. You can't drop a wheel. Don't screw up. Like that's good practice.
Right.
You know, you throw on red tires in qualifying in IndyCar. You get 1, maybe 2 laps. It's really good practice for that kind of stuff. The racing is intense. You can work on racecraft and just like getting comfortable in those situations, decision making, all that stuff. So I actually see the home sims as more of a mental training tool than like a driving dynamics thing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I'll quickly pull the audience here. Any questions while we're kind of trugging along here? No, we're good. All right. And then I want to ask you, what is it like what would you say for the business side of the sport? We talked at the beginning of this, the difficulty of showing up to a testing day, being like, oh my God, I'm super fast, I'm amazing. And then the program doesn't come together, right? No one cares.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the tips you would give, to people looking for sponsorship? Like and especially the dynamic of the sport today, really, like, how does it look like? How do you sell yourself? How do you try to provide value to the sponsors and create the whole package around you?
Okay.
This is the tough question, right? Like
This is worth the price of admission. This is what you came for. No, so it's so difficult, man. I was very fortunate, I guess, or unfortunate. But so Dario Franchitti always used to tell me I was born like 12 years too late. If I was born 12 years earlier, my life would have been very different because tobacco money was neat.
Right,
Super neat.
right. Different era.
Right.
Different era.
So like, my first year of car racing was 2004. Tobacco ban? Anybody?
Ooh.
2003.
Oh.
So I missed the entire boat. And so bad, so unfortunate, but fortunate in the sense that I didn't have to do that transition, right? I was brought up in like 2004, Champ Car was already kind of going downhill. IRL was still trying to, grow and figure itself out. It was still being largely funded by the family. We hadn't even got to '08 yet. Sponsorship was tough. And so, what happened is for 20 years, Champ Car and Kart, whatever, IndyCar was all propped up by tobacco money. And then overnight, all the tobacco money disappeared. And all of a sudden, all these team owners are standing there with these empty bags that no longer have cash in them. They're like, well, where's the money? And it didn't just show up anymore in the mailbox. Like tobacco, it was a joke. How much money they spent and how easy it was to get was actually comical looking back on it now. And for 20 years, none of them had actually had to go out and find a real sponsor.
Right.
And so the sport suffered tremendously because nobody prepared for it and nobody knew how to do it. And so this is the era I grew up in, right? So I was taught from day one by a guy called Jim Bowie that you have to be as relevant and competitive off the track as you are on the track. Because he's like, a lot of drivers are good, but if you don't have the money to go drive, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had this awesome education at a really young age at the off track side of the sport was just as important, if not slightly more important than what I was doing on track at the time. So, to answer your question, racing in the racetrack is a really cool experience, right? IndyCar, specifically around IndyCar. So IndyCar ratings are getting better. Thanks, NBC.
Right.
Keep up the great work.
Yeah, right on the cam.
But for a long time, they were not great. Like the merge and everything.
Sure, yeah.
We went through a tough decade, right? And as a result, you saw much fewer consumer products sponsoring cars because there wasn't anybody watching. So they didn't care about advertising things that you and I can go to the store and buy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what started the proper like business to business model for sponsorship. And so there's two ways that you can kind of secure sponsorship and give a decent ROI to a company. The first is those proper B2B plays. So, your company X sells things that this company Y, who sponsors another car, buys from someone else. We introduce you at the racetrack. You now buy from you, and the racing program was worthwhile.
Gotcha.
So it's a lot of look at who's existing in your world and then try to find people that can benefit from those relationships.
And it's not so much from them benefiting from you.
It's nothing to do with you.
It's so funny.
The sticker on the card doesn't matter.
It's so funny you say that. Just talking to Stu Clark literally yesterday. He's like, Zlad, this is the sport now. It's B2B. And that's how you find, the commissions on these deals are quite significant. And that's how you find the funding to run programs. It's really cool to hear you echo that kind of idea.
No, for sure. Who do you think taught him that?
Ah, there you go.
So then the other side of it is a lot of companies can use it because again, the racetrack is a cool experience, and this is probably more relevant to someone that's starting out, right, grassroots level for sponsorship. It's a really cool experience. Everybody does a golf tournament, and golf objectively sucks. So do something different and more fun. You bring people out to a racetrack. You use racing as a customer appreciation event, as a business development event, right? So you get companies to bring out vendors or prospective clients and things like that. Yep. It's a hospitality vehicle almost.
And it's the coolest one you can do.
It's the coolest one you can do, unless you're putting your sticker on the side of a SpaceX ship. Like that would be cool too. Wouldn't last long, but yeah. So those are kind of the two ways that you can successfully do it. And again, especially at the grassroots level, that building an experience for people, giving them someone to come out to the racetrack and giving them somebody to cheer for. Like your sticker's on that car, we're going to cheer for that guy, and they love it. The driver comes up to the suite and signs autographs and meet and greets and all that stuff. Like it's a really personal experience. Like if you're a company that sponsors the Leafs, you don't get to go into the locker room and shake hands with all the guys before the game. If you sponsor a race team, the driver's going to come up to the suite and take pictures with all your clients and customers and employees and sign stuff or whatever. It's such a different experience in the sporting realm than any other like stick and ball sport or anything like that. So you just got to think about what racing has to offer that other sports don't and really try to exploit that. That's a 3-hour seminar. I'm trying to cut it down in 5 minutes, but yeah. Those are some of the good tips.
Yeah, I think you gave I like what you did there is you kind of stratified and you said, look, when you're entry level, it's about selling the experience, selling, the hospitality that you can kind of build around your sport. And then as you get you move up the ranks, now you're thinking B2B because now the budgets go up.
Correct.
And now you're thinking, how do I link this company that does X with this company that does Y? They do a deal, I can go racing. It's basically kind of the way to look at it. And it's cool because now you have, the business of motorsport kind of schools are popping up and trying to teach kids like, look, it's not one thing to be fast. Now you got to be fast and, a marketer off track and be able to provide value for the client and that sort of thing.
It's what makes this sport so awful. Because if you're a really good hockey player, all you got to do is play hockey.
For sure.
If you're a really good baseball player, all you got to do is play baseball. If you're a really good driver, you're halfway there.
Yeah, it's a strange one.
At best.
It's a strange one.
So it's the worst sport. Don't ever get involved. Yeah. Like buy a tennis racket. I don't know, but once you're in, you're in. You can't get away from it.
Yeah, that's hilarious. It's funny, again, just referencing Stu, but, Mac being as fast as he is, I'm like, Stu, I'm sorry, dude, your kid's fast.
Yeah.
That sucks for you, man.
The worst thing a father could hear is, your son's a great driver. Damn it. Shit, this is going to cost me a lot.
There goes the cottage idea. Yeah. There goes like early retirement. And now it's like, you got to do it. But I think it's safe to say in the end, it's worth it. You've been able to have such an incredible career and just like a remarkable journey and, do the thing you love at like the highest level, really. I mean, it's pretty
so
cool.
Lucky, man. Like I said, 9 years old, I said, that's not a real job. No one gets to do that. And I got to do it for 10 years as a professional and, another 10 years just trying to get there. So so lucky.
Yeah. And I mean, at the culmination of all of it, you get to come here and hang out with us.
This is really why I did it, was to get to this moment was worth the last, 25 years. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it is pretty wild. And I'm just going to poll the audience again. Any questions? Anyone? We got a couple of hands going up. Sorry, we'll jump over this.
Did he steal your question?
Yeah, the question. Yeah, so just for the people on the camera watching, the question over there without the mic.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Being around these wicked names like Andretti and Haas and all that stuff. If you want to pull back the curtain and give us some inside look on
sure
those experiences like with those names.
Absolutely. So as a rookie to get signed by Newman Haas was like the most insane thing ever. I watched them win championship after championship, and it was such an honor to get to drive for that team. What's important to note though is that it wasn't the same team it was back in the heyday. They didn't weather the merge as well as some of the other programs. When Paul Newman passed away, that was a huge blow to the organization, to the sponsorship side of things. Obviously, his name drew quite a bit. By the time I signed for them, Carl Haas was quite ill. He was quite sick. So his wife Bernie was really running the team, and we were operating on a shoestring budget. Like they said, they signed me. We didn't have any money to go racing. We missed the first race, and we weren't even supposed to finish the season. The sponsor that we got, Toronto-based company, Sprott Asset Management, and Eric Sprott supported us to get from the second race of the season through to Toronto. And Toronto, he was going to host a big thing and entertain guests and all the things we've been talking about. And then that was kind of where the money ran out. And it was Bernie Haas that kept the car going. We were running good for Rookie of the Year, and they wanted to keep the car on track. So like I owe them as much thanks as anybody for keeping me in that car. And by that time, that team it was long in the tooth. It was much smaller operation, much lower budget operation, but it was a family, man. Like I think the newest employee had been there for 11 years. Like if you were a Newman Haas guy or girl, you were a Newman Haas lifer. Like that was just the way it went there. My engineer that year, his first job out of college was at Newman Haas, and he was, married with 2 kids by the time he ran me. So that place was really, really special. It had a really special atmosphere, really special culture. And that was their last year on track. The team shut down at the end of that year. So it's cool to be a part of the history of that team. We won Rookie of the Year together despite missing the first race. And that was the last title basically that team won. So incredible to, add your name to the list of drivers that have been at that team and work with some of those people, some of whom are still very dear friends of mine today. Then I went to Andretti. I mean, completely different program. You have what was at the time and still one of the most commercially savvy teams in the paddock, very business oriented on the commercial side. Like Newman Haas didn't have a commercial department. The team manager kind of went and pitched sponsors, where you walk into Andretti and it's a much more of a corporate feel. Obviously, the most iconic name in motorsports is above the door and counts for a lot. There's a lot of expectation that comes with that in a lot of different ways, on track, off track, et cetera, et cetera. And a much bigger team. It was a three-car team. We expanded to a 4-car team. So it was a very different program. But that first stint in Andretti was, I mean, those are some of the best years of my career racing wise. The relationships were great. The thing is racing is about people. It's not about cars or engines or tires. It's all about people. You can have a smaller budget, but if you have the right group of people working together, you can be just as successful as the guys that throw a bunch of money at programs. And we had a really, really good group of people. We also had a decent amount of money, so it was a good situation. But working alongside some of these people has been awesome. Like Michael's an incredible character. Pretty introverted guy, but he's just as dedicated to winning now as he was as a driver. He's so fiercely competitive, and he's building his motorsports empire up and like getting to sit in hospitality and have Mario just come sit down next to you and ask you about your session. And you're just like, oh, you asked me a question. Sorry. What? And he's just he is the coolest person on the planet. Mario Andretti is the GOAT. So yeah, it's been incredible, man. I mean, just to get to work with some of these people and drive for some of these people and add some success to some of these teams it's just an amazing feeling.
Great question. I think I saw another hand up over there. Marco or Roger?
Bathurst, yeah. What made me want to go do the Bathurst 1000? It's the Bathurst 1000. What driver doesn't want to go do the Bathurst 1000? It's, I love Australia. I got to spend a bunch of time over there throughout my life for different reasons. And I just love the country. I love the culture. And I've always loved that series. Like when I was a kid and Speed Vision was still around, you wouldn't know. Before your time, pal. But, they had, BTCC and like World Rally and Supercar. I loved it. And I got the opportunity they did the Gold Coast race, right? So IndyCars used to race down at the Gold Coast, and they stopped going, but the supercars still went, and they did, it was an endurance race. You had to have a second driver, and for that event only, you had to have an international driver. So it was guys coming over from Europe, guys coming from North America, whatever. And I got the opportunity to do that one year and just had an absolute riot. Like those cars are so much fun. They're the perfect mix of like basic raw race car, but like enough technology that you don't feel like you're driving a NASCAR. Um, They're better now. They're better now. We were talking. They're better now. But yeah. So the formula was just awesome. And then Michael was runs a team over there with Walkinshaw and United, and they asked Alex and I if we wanted to go do a wild card entry and figure it out. And we're like, yeah, man, absolutely. It's the hardest car to drive well, and one of the hardest tracks on earth. And we had like half a day at a parking lot track test before we got to go to the mountain and like figure it out. So it was a very humbling experience.
There's a lot of walls on that track.
There's a lot of walls.
And a lot of hills and a lot of
very up and down. It's quite literally a mountain. But man, it was such a cool experience. And like, I wanted, as soon as the race was done, we finished like last, or whoever didn't crash, and we beat them. And at the end of the race, I was like, we're coming back next year. We got to do this again. And Rossi gets out of the car and he's like kicking stuff. And he's like, I'm never coming back to this shithole. And I was like, what are you talking? Why? He's like, we got our asses kicked. We were terrible. I don't want to come back here, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, the hard part's over. Like now, imagine we could go back to Thursday knowing what you know now. It would be a completely different experience. Yeah. So like, obviously it's been a couple years. You need a little bit of a refresher. But I would love to do it again sometime. Awesome series, awesome race. Love it. Love it.
Right on. Great question. Marco.
So, what the average amount of sponsorship that you got, or what it costs to go racing, that's a very it's a very situational answer. An IndyCar budget is anywhere from $5 to $8 million a car. Like Penske, Ganassi, they spend 8+ probably per car. Coin probably spends 4 to 5 per car, and there's that number. You have to get to that number. Teams usually have some sponsorship of their own. Sometimes it's the full package, and you're just showing up and driving. Sometimes there's a gap that needs to be filled. So it really, really depends. We've had, I've been part of deals that were anywhere from 500 grand to 4.5 million. It really just depends on what the team needs, what assets are available to sell, and it really is unique to each situation. And every team has their rate card, we call it. So essentially, there's this sheet of paper we call the cuts of meat, and it's a race car with all these different lines, sectioning off each part of the car and what each part costs, right? So it's like, here's your fillet, here's your T-bone, here's your ribeye, here's your side pod, here's your engine cover, here's your front wing, and then the associated costs. And every deal can be different. There can be product swap deals. There can be equity deals. I know teams that will take sponsorship, and if they're short on cash, be like, all right, we'll take some of the company. So it really, really, there's no formula. There's no set anything. It's a very, like I said, a very situational thing.
Yeah. Follow-up part 2.
Right. So how is the EV world going to affect motorsports? I think it has already quite a bit. You look at what first happened in sports cars, going to hybrid cars, what we've seen obviously with Formula E and Extreme E, and now with F1 doing hybrid, IndyCars going hybrid. There is a tremendous push from the manufacturers to go that route. My personal feeling, so I didn't believe in Formula E when it started. And then like 3 years later, I looked really dumb and was like, my foot doesn't taste very good. And because of the push from essentially the public sector for these companies to get more on board with EV technology, that was all of a sudden a really good marketing exercise and a really good R&D development place, right? So if you're a Mercedes or Porsche or some of these companies that went and did it, you could spend marketing dollars and R&D dollars on this program because you're developing this technology that you're eventually going to put in your road car. It's what racing was always built on, right? Was development for the road. And we've seen manufacturers now kind of pulling back a little bit in FE. A couple of them are dropping out. More series are going to hybrid, so that maybe opens up doors to go into more traditional forms of motorsports. I think FE's done a really good job. I think they're going to be around for a long time. My personal feeling is that electric vehicles in general are going to hit a ceiling. There's so much work being done on alternative fuels, and the global infrastructure for liquid fuel is just too big. It's really too big to wipe out completely. In 5 years, as Formula One has claimed they can do, come up with a fuel that is the same mileage, same horsepower, and zero emissions, and created in a lab.
Well, Porsche just announced, I think one of the Super Carrera or whatever, the premier GT3 Cup Series is going to these alternative fuel sources.
Right. So EV had this really good run, this really good growth, and there's always going to be a market for it. I think there will always be appeal to certain people, and the technology is great and it's improving, and I would buy one. I haven't yet. I've seriously considered it, but I really like the way that they're going. I don't really want to race one, if I'm honest. My belief is the way the world is going and the way the science is going, I think that liquid fuel will get to a point where EVs don't have quite as big an appeal as they do currently. So the hybrid stuff is here to stay because that's still super relevant for road car technologies. And I think in a lot of cases, that'll be as far as it will go. I think, like I said, Formula E's got its place because it's a good championship, a lot of good drivers, a lot of good sponsors, a lot of good tech companies, a lot of relevance for it. But I don't think it's going to overhaul internal combustion engines essentially long term.
Right on.
But what do I know?
Evidently quite a bit, let's be real. But you know what? Speaking of what you know, I think you've shared quite a lot with the... Oh, we have one more question in the back, I believe.
Yes, I sure can, Rebecca, my sister,
Yes.
everybody. Thank you.
Pepper.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the question was about the physicality of driving these cars. And yeah, it is a common misconception to a lot of people. I assume no one in this room, but to a lot of people that drivers aren't athletes. And it's simple math, right? The G forces that your body is subjected to in these cars is phenomenal. So in IndyCar, you can brake at 5G, you can sustain corner at 3.5, almost 4G. So simple math. Your head weighs 10 pounds. When you hit the brakes into turn 4 at Mid-Ohio, 5G negative acceleration, that means your 10-pound head now weighs 50 pounds and is trying to pull off your shoulders. So you need a strong neck. Well, then you turn into that corner, and that corner is probably a 3.2 G corner, and you have a 1,500-pound race car without power steering. And so because of the downforce on the car, the faster the car goes, the more it's being pressed into the ground, the heavier the steering gets. If you drive a vintage car without power steering, around a parking lot, it's a pain, but once you're moving, it's fine. We're the exact opposite. We can move around the pits, no problem. Slow corners, no problem. The faster the corner, the heavier the steering wheel. So your 1,500-pound car now weighs 4,500 pounds in a 3G corner, and all that force is coming through the wheel. Got to hold your head up still, so you've done your 50 pounds this way, now you're 30 pounds this way. You got to support your legs with your core because your legs are dancing on the pedals. The smallest input can have a huge effect on the handling. So that's one corner of one leg. So you go to a track that's got 15 corners and you're doing 100 laps. That's quite hard. You need a lot of physical strength because you're working so hard. Your heart rate comes up, which means you need incredible cardio endurance because, hockey, you play for a 2-minute shift and you sit down. Football, it's explosive for 10 seconds, then you kind of take a break, you regroup. Racing, you're at that level. If there's no cautions, you're at that level the entire time. So a 2 to 4 hour period, you are operating at that level. So you need the cardio endurance, you need the muscular strength to be able to do it and do it well for that amount of time. And as your body fatigues, the mind fatigues. And when the mind fatigues at those speeds, you make mistakes and game over. So hydration, we have about a liter of fluid in the car, maybe, and it's usually like 80 degrees and you don't want to drink it. So you can, I think the biggest loss I ever saw was 9 pounds in the Indy 500 from start to finish. And it's basically all water weight.
And I guess you take all the straightaways you get to relax your hands.
It's one of the hardest things to remember to do.
breathe,
Yeah.
relax, take a moment.
Iowa is a 17-second lap. Well, it was the last time I raced. It was about a 17-second lap. 7/8 of a mile track, averaging 180 something miles an hour. So, in a 17-second lap, you're cornering for about 10 of them. Okay, so you're on the straightaways for about 3 seconds aside, and so you have to. And Iowa is it's a high banked oval. The G-force there is incredibly high. So at 4G, your lungs can't expand. They're not strong enough to inhale at that G. So you've got to hold your breath going into the corner.
That's perspective.
Take a breath in, hold it through the corner. You're adjusting, you're bouncing around, you're doing whatever, feet, hands. You get on the straightaway. You try and get 3 breaths in before you hold your breath again, and then turn for another 5 seconds holding your breath. And then you're like, cool, I only have to do that 299 more times. So it's incredibly, and then the way cars are set up on ovals, they obviously they're naturally trying to turn left. So on the straightaways, you're actually putting quite a bit of force in the wheel to turn it right.
Right.
So like on a road course, you can maybe kind of let go of the wheel or go light on the hands, and
But you can't on
but you
oval.
really can't.
No
You're kind of
chance.
like one hand at a time. But short ovals, you're constantly shifting. So you're like ma, 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 ma.
Yeah.
And that's just by yourself. Never mind the fact that there's 20 other cars on the track that you probably shouldn't run into, and if they move in front of you, it totally affects how your car handles, whatever. So yeah, those races are incredibly challenging.
Wild.
Thanks, sis. What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
No,
so
the best
breakthrough.
the best is when the engineer comes on the radio and he's like, all right, so we need you to save fuel. We got to make these tires last, so conserve the tires, but you really got to get ahead of the guy in front of you. And I was like, copy, save fuel, go faster, take care of tires. Got it, chief.
Do the impossible. Yeah. Yeah.
The worst. Engineers, I tell you, the worst.
And we got one more in the back.
What series we talking?
Oh, touche. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Hard pass. I'm going to say 65-45 driver. F1, it's like 90-10 car. It just is. Like, that's not a shot at F1. That's just realistic. It's very hard to do it. Like,
you see it on the timing sheets, and then you see what happens. Like when they put George in the fast car, it's like, oh, George is going to win every race.
Right. Yeah.
Except they messed him up on that race. But
yeah. But yeah, no. It really depends on the series. And what makes IndyCar so cool is that it is a lot. It's a lot more even. The parity is a lot better than in a lot of other forms of motorsport. Sports car by default gets it the best because they have balance of performance, right? So if you can BOP cars, you can make everybody even, and then there's strengths and weaknesses to different cars at different tracks, but it is obviously a lot in the team and driver's hands. But yeah, for IndyCar, you can make a difference as a driver for sure, but you still need to win. You need the equipment. There's no doubt.
All right. And
yeah, so my first season was with the old car, with the IR03. No. I'd love to, man. That thing was a beast. I did do a test day in the Lola, so the generation before that. I got to drive PT's player's car around a test track in Texas, which was wild. That thing was especially I was coming out of a Pro Mazda car at the time, like 250 horsepower,
different
single seater straight into 750 horsepower twin turbocharged. That thing was awesome. Yeah, missed that car.
Well, I think we're Marco over. We'll squeeze one in.
What's second?
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Well, you know what, guys? We'll kind of wrap it up here for the team chat, but we'll let obviously everyone swarm you after the official chat's over. But thank you again for everyone for showing out. Thank you for our club for hosting the space, and thank you for Mr. James Hinchcliffe for giving us the time.
Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.